We are live. Yes, we are live. Good morning and welcome to the Owlery and Midweek Mochas, your midweek check-in and opportunity to have a cup of coffee with us while you readjust.
Lord. All right, that's just going to bother me.
That's okay. They can see us. We are visible.
We look like we're hostages.
You're welcome to think that.
Okay.
So, speaking of readjusting, that's what today's show is all about. Obviously, we weren't here last week. That's because just about everyone in the house fell ill.
So we took a little time off for Easter with schooling, and then everybody got sick. And then earlier this week, we received news of a death in the family. And so it served as a good reminder that life happens. So no matter what plans you come up with, life happens.
Yeah.
And that can be an additional challenge when you are pursuing a course of home education with your own children.
Yeah.
There is greater flexibility. I mean, we can just kind of throw the books in the car and take them on the road with us if we go to attend the funeral services. When we get sick, it's like, okay, you know what? Get your handwriting done and, let mom go sleep or whatever. So there's some greater flexibility there in dealing with the vicissitudes of life. But you still have to deal with them.
Yeah.
And so if you have a neatly planned out, kind of scope and sequence, and we're going to do this week and this next week, and we'll take this week off, and then the following week we'll jump right back in. It's very easy, especially when you're starting out. We certainly did this. Say, oh, well, this is the plan. We've got to follow the plan, and we're going to drive to the plan.
And then February hits.
Yeah, February hits, and usually in February we get sick for, 6 or 8 weeks.
If you talk to any experienced homeschooler, everyone mentions the February downturn, because not only is that, when the sort of cough and cold season frequently will hit a family, especially if, you soldiered through the holidays and then everyone's just exhausted, people get sick. But also you sort of hit a doldrums. It's like getting a calm spot in the sea, and all of a sudden everyone's just sort of got cabin fever and loses their ability to stay focused. So there's that, but you've also got illness hitting and unexpected things happen. So one of the things I was thinking about is that there's the planned break. And planned breaks are one thing where you can recognize if you've already had family members mention that there's going to be a wedding in a particular month, make plans.
Weddings, reunions, major functions,
graduations, that sort of thing. That's where you're going to already plan, okay, our school is off between this date and this date.
Or you can take it on the road with you. But that gets hard if you've got a lot of events and you're away from your stuff.
I mean, it's one thing if you're doing a family vacation. I mean, we've done a vacation that basically was an extended school trip.
Well, we've done one.
Okay. But we
in all the years we've been schooling the kids, we've done one family vacation in that time.
But that was basically like a big field trip, because we did several state parks, and we brought along all kinds of books that helped them, really get engaged with, learning about some of the interesting things that were around them. We did some stargazing. And so you can make school happen on the road, but treat it like a field trip where it's like we're doing different school than we normally do. Although we actually hauled along a computer for that one because we had some online classes that still kept going. But if you're doing something where it's like, you're going to meet family and there's going to be lots of occasions, just plan that's, time off. We have planned downtime around major holidays where it's like we realize, one, before the holiday, we are going to be
preparing for the holiday.
Yeah, there's cooking, there's cleaning.
And then we're going to celebrate the holiday. And I mean, like we celebrate Christmas over a couple of weeks. We celebrate Easter over a couple of weeks. So for us,
that's when our winter and spring breaks are. But we also don't really take a summer break. And so part of how we do that is
That's because it's so hot and miserable outside that the squirrels are melting into the pavement and the kids just want to sit in the air conditioning all day.
Yeah. And so you can decide, all right, we're going to take some longer breaks during the school year and bake it in to recognize that, with the exception of a couple of weeks in summer where there's a camp or something going on, we're going to have schooling continuing through the summer as a way to balance out taking slightly longer breaks during the school year. But
so that's really one of the first keys to understand is as you shift to home education, even if you're in a state with very, very strict reporting requirements, your schedule is your own. You can decide what works best for your family, when to school, when to take a break. And as you become more experienced, you learn, you know what? The headbutting about this point, that's not a sign I need to change curriculum. That's a sign that everybody just needs to take a couple of days off and go run around, or we need to go, if you're a family that camps or hikes or whatever, we're just gonna, okay, school's done for the next couple of days. We're gonna go do this thing, and then we're gonna come back refreshed.
yeah.
And I've watched over the last 20 years this same cycle play out in my professional life, with coworkers, with myself, where you'll push and push and push on a project. And I mean, I spent a lot of time in the entertainment business as a teenager and young adult, and we both worked in a lot of theater before we got married. When we got married, the nice thing about the rhythm of theater is that you work on a show, you intensely work on the show during tech week, and then the show goes up. And so the actors just roll into performing, and the technicians, they're more or less done. They move on to the next gig. Some of them have another gig lined up immediately. Others take a break voluntarily or involuntarily. But there's this kind of arc. And what I found very quickly in theater, leaving theater for the corporate world, is that arc doesn't happen in the corporate world, because there's this expectation that everyone will just maintain this fever pitch all the time. And what we found when we were first homeschooling, talking with other home educators, people more experienced than we were, a lot of them had the impression that that's how institutional schools work, forgetting their own schooling experience. Because I don't know about you all, but I know Laura and I have talked about this. I remember days where the teacher just wheeled in the AV cart, and we were just going to watch a movie because the teacher she just couldn't, whatever, for whatever reason. Or teacher was called away unexpectedly for any number of reasons. Students usually weren't told, but we'd have a substitute. Well, when you shift to home education and you're responsible for arranging those resources, you don't have a pool of temps you can call to sub in for a day. And there are days where it's like, you know what? We're putting on a movie and we're just going to veg out, or we're going to a baseball game today because that's our family's thing. It's not in our case, but I know a family who it's like, you know what? When they all need a break, they go watch a baseball game. I don't know what they do when it's not baseball season, but
So that was sort of one of the things. Sometimes what you just do is take a break, and a planned break. I'll give you a moment there.
sorry. As I said, we fell ill.
Yeah. Well, we've also got allergy seasons at the moment. We are in a state where we don't really get spring. We just have the trees decide it's time to spread pollen everywhere.
And lots of mountain cedar blows in from the western states.
Yes. So sometimes you just need to take a break, and having planned breaks, just plan them in advance. Don't get shocked when you discover that you're upon a holiday that, it's like, if the holiday doesn't matter to you, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I don't, it's like there's federal holidays where, everyone's taking off. You're not required to take those days off.
And I've worked for guys in some of the smaller companies where, they'd give the rest of us the day off because it was a federal holiday, but they themselves continued to work because it wasn't a holiday of any importance to them. Putting their business together and moving that forward was of greater importance to them.
Yeah. So I mean, you can keep doing school on President's Day even if it's a bank holiday.
Let your family's priorities
Yeah.
guide that schedule of when and how you choose to school.
But on the opposite end, if Easter is important to you, which that's the most recent one that's happened for most of us, if that's an important holiday for your family, well then plan that it's not just going to be maybe the sort of the Friday and Monday surrounding.
Pew Cafe?
No, thank you. That's where you look and say, okay, our family, we don't just do Easter. We've got the 3-day run up where we're going to be in church for several days, and we generally need a couple of days to recover. So let's just plan. We're going to block out a 2-week spring break in this period because this is important to our family.
Right.
And plan that in advance, because what's going to happen is if you think you're going to just try to sort of school right up until it happens and then hop right back in.
And we learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
We learned that the hard way. Yeah. So learn from our mistakes, please.
It's like they happen. It's like that's the place where you want to plan to say, okay, we are not going to try to be foolish and try to move up to this because it's not going to. You're going to discover there was more cooking and cleaning that you thought was needed. And now you're going to be stressed, which is not going to make it easy to celebrate your holiday.
More stress.
And it's not going to make it easy for your kids to do their schoolwork because you're going to be distracted and it's going to be harder to work with them on getting their work done. So plan that break if that's an important festival for your family. But then there are the unplanned events. If you fall sick, but the kids are fine, there are definitely ways that you can keep school going. So the first thing is have a list of everything that they can actually do on their own and start habituating them to doing it on their own. So handwriting is a great example. With our handwriting, we've got a book which has the model and it has some model words, and they do copy work. And then they eventually move to doing copy work in their best hand that they're being taught as they move on from having learned all of their letters. So if we've got handwriting can be done even if I am 103 degrees fever and delirious.
Well, usually when you're that bad, I'll put you to bed, and if necessary, take some time off of work to oversee things.
Yes, but if I'm like what we most recently had
handwriting being a skill, this kind of comes back to that. What's the nature of the particular subject that's being studied?
Yeah, and most of the skills, they may not be in a place where you can teach additional, but practice and maintenance, piano practice can still be done. Singing practice can still be done. Anything that's already sort of a skill-based level of handwriting, you can keep on doing that. And if you start habituating your kids early to, these are things that you can do unsupervised. You can practice the poetry memorization and other memory work that you're doing, regardless of mom being in the room. And that's one way you can keep school going, is have elements of your schoolwork that are skills that are just requiring daily practice, that they're habituating to doing independently.
Yes.
If you have work,
and again, that has to be age appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not appropriate to expect a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, or I would think even an 8-year-old, some 8-year-olds, to be able to navigate a school day on their own without parental guidance.
No.
But you've managed to get them moving in that direction with the checklists.
Yeah.
Which we need to do a show on.
We do need to do a show on the checklist because they have helped immensely. They're not a panacea, but from a mom, what do I need to do standpoint, they've done a huge amount of helping to keep everyone clear on what their actual daily tasks are, which helps a lot. And it helped me start to separate which are the mom required tasks or rather teacher required, because you do a lot of those. But they help to separate the, teacher required tasks from the ones that can be done with very little intervention.
Yeah.
And so if you've got the low intervention tasks, those can keep on going if you, the teacher, are the only one who's ill.
And that's another good point, which I think we need to do a show on, is that, one of the keys to successfully home educating is you yourself don't have to teach everything.
Yeah.
And really that is its own show. So without kind of going down the rabbit hole, your schedule is yours to plan. It's kind of like the sales pitch of, like, I don't know, every sort of entrepreneurial venture or quasi-entrepreneurial, you set your own hours. Well,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
You still have to set an adequate number of hours
Mhm.
to get the work done, and then you have to follow through and do the tasks.
Yeah.
But when we were first home educating, I remember we would have these. I mean, they were lesson plans that a school would accept, because we thought that's what we were supposed to do. Everybody we talked to either had been a school teacher and had to file lesson plans, or was inclined to think that that was the proper way to do it. And we'd have these beautifully laid out lesson plans that didn't survive even 3 days.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of one of the old Murphy's laws of combat, that no plan survives contact with the enemy intact, and that's true.
Yeah.
It's as true in project planning and software development and delivery, which I've been working in for the last
Well, I'm
10
trying
to
to
12
remember.
years.
I'm trying to remember in my actual schooling. So I had
Oh, we never got through the syllabus
no. I
or
mean,
those lesson plans.
I had exactly one teacher who actually was able to drive through and keep us on the syllabus. But I mean, I remember an English class where we never got to Red Badge of Courage. I know.
No great loss there.
No. I'm sorry for all of you who love the classics. There's
No. Red Badge of Courage is not a classic.
Okay. Anyways.
That's its own show.
The-
What's a classic? Good books versus great books.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to that.
And why we never made our kids read Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
Oh.
Don't worry, there's some Brit lit they got. But no, we've got. We okay?
Better.
Okay. So there's definitely things that you can. Sorry, I'm trying to stay on track. There's definitely things that you can keep them doing. And the same thing as if you remember from our early episode about textbooks and boring textbooks. One of the advantages to a boring textbook workbook system is you can at least keep on saying, read part 1 of chapter 7 and do the associated section in the workbook.
Don't confuse activity with education.
That is true.
A lot of schoolwork in institutional schools is activity. How much of it do you remember? How much of it do I remember? I mean, I've got a pretty damn good memory, or at least I used to. But no, that's another key to surviving when life throws curveballs at you. Is yes, you can manage your own schedule, but the other thing is, don't confuse activity with education, with accomplishment. There's plenty of busy work in every office I've ever worked in. There's plenty of busy work in every school I've ever studied in, whether we're talking elementary, middle, high school, grad school, college.
But this is where we have to move over the strategy. That part of the thing, though, is that while you are taking a day off personally, you also do have to keep the students to some degree busy, but not necessarily with schoolwork. And that brings me to my other strategy. As you recall, rolling in the AV cart. Although in a house, you don't have to roll in a cart. You just like set it up in wherever your home's entertainment is.
See, that's where we disagree.
Okay.
Rolling in the AV cart in when we were in school, that was really I have no lesson plan. we need something to fill the day. We're just going to waste time. They could have sent us home.
Well, at least for the period. And that was the problem, is that typically if you're
right. But that's part of what I'm saying. When we deploy video lessons or whatever, that's substantively different.
Yeah.
That's because we have expanded beyond, does it look like it fits in an institutional school box?
That's true. And that was the thing, is like you can roll in the video. It doesn't necessarily have to be an educational video, though. That's like, as we've noted, my tendency when I get ill is to just throw Pride and Prejudice on.
I tend to throw on the 81 Brideshead Revisited
yes.
that ITV did, the one with Jeremy Irons and Anthony Andrews.
Which means we're not necessarily doing a school lesson. It's not like watching any of our video series that are actual educational video series, which is one of the ways we do.
I know, we watched La La Land like 3 times this week.
Okay, that's fair. But
then we also ended up talking about the film influences on Damien Chazelle, the musical influences on is it Justin Hurwitz who was his composition partner for that?
Don't recall.
We talked about camera angles and dynamics and stuff, because that's all stuff that's that we're interested in, that our kids are interested in.
And we ended up talking about, what's the purpose of a Fantasia sequence when you're having, what was called the Dream Ballet, which was so popular in that sort of 1950s, 60s era of film musicals. That was the influence. So even when we're watching what, is just a movie, it's not an adaptation of great literature. It's not a lecture series. We end up talking about something. So it ends up being education, even when it's not school.
That's one of the dirty little secrets, that really what you're going for in home education is stimulating conversations.
Yes.
Stimulating conversations with your own children, stimulating conversations with your spouse, with your circle of friends, because it's communication that should be the result of education.
And so the point of wheeling in the AV cart isn't necessarily to keep everyone occupied. It's more what can we do that's going to continue to provide a starting point for discussion when I don't have the energy to lead the discussion myself.
Yes.
And that's what you do, is you just like, okay, what keeps educating even when I can't keep schooling? And so pick a movie that you can watch.
And then there are some people who, having evaluated that, decide they can just throw schooling out the window completely, and more power to them.
Well, I do recall years ago there was this priest we knew who joked that you could probably do nothing but play chess with your kids and
checkers. He said checkers.
It was checkers.
Chess, I could almost buy that. Yeah. Checkers, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, but that actually does pull out a game. Because
the problem with pulling out a game when you're feeling ill is that gets very, very hard. It's very stressful to manage teaching young people a game and keeping them all corralled. Especially when they're in that, I don't know, say 7 to 12 range, where they're still learning how to play games and to lose gracefully.
Yes, that is true. And that's
if what you're looking for is low stress, you don't want to pull out a board game. Now, we have a bunch of board games that our kids can play on their own, and they will do that. We have, as we said, we'll pull out videos or whatever. And I mean, there are just some days where it's like, it's beautiful outside. You're healthy enough. We'll move one of the cars. I can sit in a chair on the lawn while you all, scooter in the driveway or play on roller skates.
If you're well and the kids are sick, different story.
Yeah.
Because if what you're hitting is that sort of winter doldrums where you've got, 1 or 2 people ill, 1 or 2 people well, everyone's hit that wall where you just need a downtime day, shift to the mode where maybe rather than trying to continue to power through the books, that's the day to pull out a board game. And board games are a way where you can continue educating even when you're not schooling, because you can decide that rather than trying to continue to power on through something, you can just pull out a board game. And most board games have got some element to them that is educational. Some of them are more obviously so. We've got a ton of board games that, either treat some area of the sciences or history. But I mean, even playing Monopoly is a way to drill place value, and a whole host of calculation, because you can't make good decisions in Monopoly beyond a certain point unless you're working on your math skills.
Right.
And so you continue to build skills even as you're playing a game and taking a day off.
Well, that was what appealed to us about one of the math curricula we've embraced and have used very successfully with all the kids over the years. Is that all of the drill work is done not by worksheets or by the recitation of tables, but by playing games.
Yes.
And I mean, we ran into some challenges with that when, you've got a 6 or an 8-year-old and the only person they can play against is mom. That doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
Once you have, 3 or 4 kids all in about the same age, and if you don't have them in the same house like we do, that's where co-ops and getting to know other homeschoolers in your area can become a really beneficial opportunity.
Yeah, because especially if you can find them a couple, within about 2 or 3 years, like that sort of Montessori 3 age year cohort, rather than grading them within a single birth year or 12-month period, works out really well, because there's a degree of parity among, if you've got 3 or 4 kids who are all about like 9 to 12.
Yeah, I mean, the experimental middle school I went to in Philadelphia did that.
Yeah.
I mean, the 6th through 8th graders were all in the same space, and we were all mixed up based on kind of where we were for the classes that we had. There were group activities, and then there were kind of breakout activities, and then there was like the 4th and 5th graders, and then there was like K through 3, and like that was how that school was divided up. And I remember even in high school, like when I was at Jesuit, I transferred in the middle of my high school career from a public high school to a Jesuit high school. Moved cities and all. That's a story for its own time. But I remember I was a junior in high school. My Latin was, I thought it was good, but it was poor enough that I was put in with sophomores. Whereas like it was one of the I'm trying to remember now. It was a very, very long time ago. I've slept once or twice since then, but there were classes where I was put in with younger students because that's where I was academically, and there are classes where I was put in with older students. I remember a friend of mine in middle school, Charles. He was like really advanced in math, while the rest of us were struggling with,
I think we've all known someone with like
algebra. He was actually like learning pre-calc or something like that. Like he was just tutored in middle school by our math teacher in one of the free periods.
I'm fairly sure I had a classmate like that in middle school as well. Like he was otherwise a fairly average student, but he was really, really good in the maths. And I think he was like taking classes over at the high school or just getting tutored or something, because he was just like grades and grades above us there. And that's one of the things, is that when you're homeschooling, you're going to have that it's going to be even more obvious that,
no one is average.
No one is average.
The average is an artificial construct. And we could even do a whole episode or even a series on that, because that whole, how do you interpret, I mean, I know you're really into using research and statistical analysis. Like that really hits, a bell of yours to look at research and all. I'm much more comfortable being very, very intuitive about these things. And but how do you interpret research? Whether you're talking nutritional research, you're talking medical research, you're talking social research, best practices for schooling. I've never thought that the professional literature was really all that helpful. But if you're going to rely on it for whatever reason, because that addresses some need you have, understanding how to read and interpret that correctly, and understanding what does the average actually mean, and that no child is going to actually fit the average.
Yeah.
That's a really important point. But before we go herring off into 6 other episodes, and this ends up becoming longer than it should,
Yeah.
we were really trying to focus this morning on when life throws curveballs,
Yeah.
how do you bat them out of the park?
So, like I said, with days where you may be fairly well, but you've got a mixed classroom of students, that's a place to move to fairly low intensity work.
Yeah.
A game is low intensity. It can even be a break or a refreshment that allows everyone to recover, watching a movie together. Another option, audiobooks.
Reading with your ears. That's its own episode.
It is
But
its own
we
episode.
absolutely need to talk about reading with your ears.
So, reading with your ears is a way of describing what an audiobook is. It is not cheating to listen to a book rather than read it. And
No,
so,
in fact, that's one of the keys to success.
yes. So, we read aloud to our kids even now. I mean, our youngest is almost 8, our oldest is 18, and
Almost 19.
almost 19. Yeah, goodness. We still read aloud to them. And that's because even though all but the youngest are strong readers, there is benefit to hearing a story. Well, if you've lost your voice because you got hit with laryngitis, you still have audiobooks. They are still a way to keep on having those read alouds. They're a way to have a quiet time where you say, you turn down the lights, have everyone camp out in a chair, lay down on a sleeping bag or whatever. Turn on an audiobook.
Quietly with Legos. Some kids need to be active in order to listen.
Yes, in fact,
that was a hard lesson for us.
Yes,
that was a very hard lesson for us. Some children cannot listen, like they physically can. Their body will not process the sound coming in the ears
unless their hands are doing something.
Unless their hands are fiddling with something.
In fact, I have several friends of mine. I have one of my classmates. She's actually a professional artist now. Her notebooks were always really funny to look at. Beautiful, but funny because it was a mix of actual class notes in a very neat hand that was reminiscent of Comic Sans.
Well, because she aspired to be a comic book artist at the time.
Yes, and so she had a beautiful sort of comic book artist handwriting style. But the doodles in her text were almost more important. She could not take notes in class unless she was also drawing pictures.
Well, and she remembered the information with those visual cues.
Oh, I remembered the information from the visual cues. There was one day in one of our classes, I think it was either theology or philosophy, but they were discussing about the signs of the Trinity in nature and how a banana, if you cut it into a section and press it, it pops into 3 sections. And this is, I don't recall why whoever was doing this was showing it as a sign of the Trinity.
Deus ex banana.
And we had images of little peeled bananas in our notebooks from this class. But the funny part was that was actually a good visual cue for that particular philosopher or theologian, and remembering that entire section, that one little visual, but she couldn't pay attention in class unless she was doodling.
Yeah. And we have children, some of our boys in particular, they have to be fiddling with something.
But whether it's, playing with Legos, doing some crocheting or knitting, because there are mindless sewing tasks where you're just doing a hem. That's actually a great thing to do. And in fact,
once you know what you're doing, if you have to instruct in how to do the task, that's not sufficiently automated enough to allow the body to do the thing while the brain processes the incoming sound.
But once it is automated, our daughter just this week was sewing puppets.
Mm-hmm.
And once she'd learned the whip stitch, she could just keep on doing that without any real need for instruction or interruption. Sewing handwork Legos, all of those are great things to do while listening to an audiobook. And if you think back to look, if you watch, a movie like, I know I've seen it in all of these 18th century stories. You've got a bunch of women sitting around and one of them is reading aloud and everyone else is doing something with their hands.
Well, because until very recently, and by very recently, I mean within the last 150 years, maybe 200 years, books were rare enough that reading aloud was the only way most people could partake of books. Even if everyone in a group was literate, there was only one book to go around, and there weren't enough hours in the day. There weren't enough hours of daylight to have everybody just read individually and silently on their own. It's really only with the 19th century advent of cheap mass market paperback books that we've developed this culture where silent reading by oneself with one's eyes is the norm.
And so
there's an anecdote Augustine relates in his Confessions about.
We have mentioned this before on a previous episode.
Have we?
Yes, we have.
I have no recollection of our previous episodes. I know we did them.
Yes.
It's too early in the morning.
Yes, you've already mentioned Augustine being stunned by Ambrose
reading. And his lips were moving, but there was no sound coming out. And that was shocking to him, because the normal way to do this is for one person to read while everyone else listens.
Yeah.
In Benedictine monasteries, it's the custom, according to the rule, to have a reader during the meal times so that petty bickering doesn't break out and that people are edified.
Speaking of which, pro tip, institute this at your own dinner table.
Yeah, we've done this very, very successfully.
Yeah. It really works out.
So it means you have to have a meal together. It means everybody has to be sitting around the same table, devices off, not even in the same room is best. And everybody, including whomever cooked the meal, has to be sitting there. And so we will, for usually one of the meals a day. There are some days where we're too busy.
Yeah.
But in general, as a rule, we try to have at least one meal a day as a family around the same table, with utensils and whatnot. And someone will read an excerpt from whatever book we're working on at the time. We just finished C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. Before that, we were reading.
It was a series of reflections for Lent.
Yeah, we were reading some Lenten reflections. It doesn't always have to be a religious text or whatever. I remember when I visited a Benedictine monastery and was invited to dine in the refectory. You're busy with the act of eating, which, by 5 or 6, everybody can manage almost on autopilot. So you're physically occupied. And at least in Benedictine monasteries, no one speaks at the refectory table. So you learn to gesture in order to, ask someone to pass you the salt or, whatever the dish was, or to refill your water glass or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have one lector, and they read the book that was being read the last time I visited was a travel log of someone who was exploring. I don't remember if it was Africa or Southeast Asia. It was somewhere with a jungle-like climate. It was a travel log. Words not wording, brain not braining. But it was fascinating. There was some adventure. It was very well written text.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really cool to have that experience. And I had known about that aspect of monastic life intellectually, but having experienced it, I came home. This was several years ago. I was like, we should start doing this or figure out how to make this kind of thing work.
And when we implemented read alouds at the table, that was huge for cutting down on bickering. But we've also frequently done a read aloud in the evening at bedtime.
We've been doing that for years now.
You can put on an audiobook if you have no voice. And it really is wonderful, especially since with a lot of the professionally recorded ones, you've got a really good reader.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed the let's see, the ones for the Narnia books are really good. We've got one for Lord of the Rings that's really good. Those are also great for road trips. Which, speaking of, for road trips, even if most of a road trip is going to be spent, doing dinners and events with family, you can spend your road trip listening to an audiobook.
We listened to Michael Lewis's The Big Short.
That was
when we did our
warning,
family vacation.
Warning on that one. That is not necessarily child appropriate.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, you're dealing with high finance, and there's plenty of language and stories related in that book that may lead to some interesting discussions. For us, that was fine. We were very happy to have those kinds of discussions. And
yeah.
I worked in that world for several years back before the financial crisis. So we could pause at different places, and I could expatiate and illustrate from my own experience some of the points that Lewis was making. And not everybody's going to have that, but I remember my grandparents used to listen to audiobooks while driving, and that actually, I found it frustrating to try and listen to those while I was doing the driving for them, because I can pay attention to the road, or I can listen to an audiobook. I personally can't do both unless I'm really familiar with the material.
I remember my mom used to listen to the audiobooks for her book club.
Yeah.
She had to drive to work. It was about 15 minutes, but she'd get them from the library, and frequently the ones that she was supposed to be reading for book club, that was part of how she would get through them.
You got me Brian Derry's Theater of War.
Oh, that's an
on
excellent
audiobook. A very, very well done audiobook. But I listened to that when I was still commuting periodically. I had a commute downtown, and during that period, I listened to Brian Derry's Theater of War. I listened to American Sniper.
Speaking of Theater of War, is an excellent...
I listened to Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, and most of these are obviously books written for adult audience, not necessarily anything material issues for the most part. I mean, American Sniper's got some pretty hard stuff in it. But,
yeah.
But I mean, with Theater of War, that's actually a very interesting one, because that is about the impact of theater as a means for processing trauma. And so for anyone who is reading theater, especially Greek theater, that might be a good one for you as a teacher to listen to
understand what this kind of art and performance can do.
Yes.
We're running long. We're kind of way off where we were trying to be, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's where all of our conversations end up. But
this is true.
Yeah, back to that idea of interruptions. If you're ill, be willing to just take the day off. Be willing to just set up something that's going to inspire conversation and those rabbit trails, because sometimes
that is the education. That is what you're trying to go for.
That when you throw Brideshead Revisited on the television and you're just vegging out because you feel awful, you might end up in a 2-hour conversation that starts with, why did Sebastian name his teddy bear Aloysius, and end up who knows where. And that's more valuable than getting through your syllabus for that day by the skin of your teeth and feeling like you're going to fall off the edge of the world.
Yeah, I mean, you can't hand on what you haven't received. And if you're ill, you need to take time off. Self-care it's like putting on your oxygen mask first. If there's a crisis in the plane that causes the oxygen masks to drop down.
And if you have to take a day down because someone got injured and had to go to the hospital, because you have to leave town unexpectedly for something, sometimes those are the times where you just have to say, don't worry about it. We can make up time in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think I referred to some of these as curveballs earlier, and I think that might be a good way to think about them. If you like baseball analogies, you don't always swing at a curveball. I mean, that's kind of the point. The curveball is coming at you very fast, and then it curves off at the last split second. So if you swing at it where you think it's going to be, you're going to miss, and then that's a strike. That's why pitchers throw curveballs. That's part of how they try and strike out batters. When life throws you a curveball, don't necessarily swing at it. Sometimes you just let it go and it's a ball. Sometimes you misjudge it and it's a strike. But that's okay. Life's going to throw the curveballs. You can decide whether or not you're going to swing at that one. And sometimes it's best just to let that curveball sail by you, take the ball, and then worry about the next pitch.
Yeah. So, sort of quick recap, plan your vacations, plan that when you have a known interruption,
plan around it,
expect it.
Find the schedule both within a given day, a given week, a given month, a given season that works best for your family and what you value. And then finally, when life throws curveballs, as it inevitably will, whether it's illness or it's death or it's, who knows what, life throws curveballs. Anybody who's lived, more than about 6 years recognizes that the best laid plans of mice and men afgang agley. Life's going to throw curveballs. You get to decide whether you're going to swing at that ball or you're just going to let it sail by.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all have yourselves a great week. Pleasure talking with you this morning. Hope you catch the recording if you missed it today, and we will be back again soon. Ciao, ciao.